There is a walnut company operating in the Missouri Ozarks that almost nobody who lives near it can tell you anything about. It is called the Missouri Walnut Company. It owns land in Berry County and Taney County, right in the heart of the Ozarks, in counties that include Table Rock Lake, Branson, and some of the most recognizable Ozarks terrain in the state. It is registered to a business in China. When local TV reporters in Springfield filed a records request with the federal government and mapped the foreign-owned farmland data for Missouri, the Missouri Walnut Company appeared on the list. Chinese-owned, operating in the Ozarks, growing walnuts, presumably. But beyond the company name and the country of registration, the details dissolve. Who runs it specifically, what parcels it controls, and how many acres, what the land looks like now compared to before the acquisition, what access, if any, exists for anyone in the surrounding community. These are questions the available public records do not cleanly answer, and the people who live near the property cannot answer them either, because no one has told them. This is not the most dramatic story about locked-off Ozarks land. It is the most instructive one, because it illustrates exactly how the transformation of the Ozarks happens in a way that is invisible to the people living inside it until it is already finished. 93% of land in Missouri is privately owned. That number comes directly from the Missouri Department of Conservation, and it has significant consequences for anyone who grew up in the Ozarks, hunted its ridges, fished its rivers, walked its back roads, or simply drove through it, and assumed that the land rolling past the window was open country that belonged to the region in some practical sense, rather than to a specific legal entity that could lock a gate, post a sign, and make it functionally disappear from community life. Every time a large parcel changes hands, every time an investment fund, an out-of-state buyer, a foreign-linked entity, or a private hunting operation acquires several hundred or several thousand Ozarks acres, the community's relationship to that land goes with the transaction. The new owner has no obligation to the community's history with the property, no obligation to leave accessible the roads that locals have used for decades, no obligation to maintain the hunting access that families built traditions around, no obligation to explain what they intend to do there, no obligation in many cases to clearly disclose who they actually are. Subscribe right now, hit the button and the bell. That last point, who they actually are, turns out to be a harder question than anyone in Jefferson City or Washington has been willing to seriously answer. In 2013, Missouri had a complete ban on foreign ownership of agricultural land in the state. 1 week before a Chinese company called Shuanghui International finalized its purchase of Smithfield Foods, the largest pork producer in the United States, which owned approximately 42,000 acres of Missouri farmland spread across 7 northern counties. Missouri lawmakers changed the law. The decades-old ban on foreign land ownership was replaced with a provision allowing foreign entities to own up to 1% of the state's total farmland. 1 week. The law that protected Missouri land from foreign acquisition was removed from the books in the window between the deal being negotiated and the deal being closed. Critics argued the timing was not a coincidence. The rule change was instrumental in allowing the transaction to go through as structured. Some members of Congress warned of Chinese government involvement in the purchase. Shuanghui, now called WH Group, publicly traded on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, denied it was a state-owned enterprise and denied acting on behalf of the Chinese government. The deal closed. WH Group became the owner of Missouri's largest industrial hog farming operation and 42,000 Missouri acres in Daviess, Gentry, Grundy, Mercer, Putnam, Sullivan, and Worth counties. A Chinese company now owns more Missouri farmland than any other foreign entity in the state. The Missouri lawmakers who supported the 2013 amendment have since largely turned against the policy they created. It has become a political cudgel in Republican primaries across the state. Legislation to roll it back has been introduced repeatedly and failed repeatedly. The governor signed an executive order in 2024 restricting foreign adversary nations from purchasing land within 10 miles of military facilities. But the 42,000 acres were already owned. The law that allowed the deal exists because the deal needed it to exist, and the deal happened faster than anyone who might have opposed it could organize a response. The tracking system for who owns Missouri's land has gaps large enough to drive a combine through. A 1978 federal law called the Agricultural Foreign Investment Disclosure Act requires foreign investors to report their agricultural land holdings to the USDA. In 2023, a local TV station in Springfield filed a records request and obtained the Missouri data. They mapped it. They found the Missouri Walnut Company in the Ozarks. They found Focal Dairies out of New Zealand. They found Shell Pipeline Company from the United Kingdom. They found Italian-owned farmland, Canadian-owned farmland, German-owned farmland scattered across the state. Then they compared those federal records to county-level records in Missouri. In dozens of Missouri counties, none of the farms registered with the federal government as foreign-owned appeared in county records with foreign addresses. The federal government said these properties were foreign-owned. The county records showed no indication of foreign ownership whatsoever. Nobody could explain the discrepancy. Nobody was held accountable for it. It simply existed. A gap in the official record large enough that a foreign entity could own significant Missouri acreage and be functionally invisible to anyone who looked at only one set of records. A 2024 study by the U.S. Government Accountability Office confirmed the problem is structural. The AFIDA data captures only principal investors, not second and third-tier investors, not the layers of holding companies and limited liability corporations and foreign subsidiaries that sophisticated institutional buyers routinely use to separate their visible names from their actual assets. The GAO recommended the federal government go deeper, require disclosure from subsidiary entities, and build a more complete picture of who ultimately benefits from foreign land ownership in America. That recommendation has not been implemented. A federal bill incorporating some of those recommendations passed the House and stalled in the Senate. The practical consequence for anyone in the Ozarks trying to find out who owns the large parcel that just got gated, the answer you can find in the public record may be a holding company name that tells you nothing, registered in a state chosen for its disclosure minimums, controlled by investors whose identities the law does not currently require anyone to reveal. Not all of the locked-off Ozarks land is owned by entities trying to stay invisible. Some of it is locked off very publicly, and the locking is the entire product being sold. The hunting grounds, located near Willow Springs in the southern Ozarks, is 2,500 acres of fenced and gated preserve in Howell County. It offers fully guided hunts for trophy red stag, elk, and white-tailed deer. The red stag are New Zealand bloodlines. The elk are managed for genetics. Multiple animals from the preserve have been ranked in the Safari Club International Record books. The five-star lodge has a great room with 26-foot vaulted ceilings and a large stone fireplace. A gated entrance controls who enters. The land is not accessible to the public under any circumstance. It was Ozarks land, Ozarks hills and timber and creek bottoms before it became a hunting preserve. The families who lived around it and walked through it and fished the creek that runs through it will not do any of those things again without paying the access fee. The Oaks Sportsman's Club in Stover covers 1,300 acres in Morgan County. Private memberships, executive-level privileges, guided trophy hunts, and ATV experiences customized for premium clients. This is not hunting for the local community. It is hunting as a luxury product sold to people from outside the Ozarks who have the income to pay for an experience that the landscape's previous accessibility once provided at no cost to the families who lived around it. Missouri licenses these operations as shooting preserves and regulates their animal populations through the Department of Conservation. They are legal, they are documented, they are the visible, admitted end of the process, the point at which Ozarks land that was previously accessible becomes exclusively accessible to people who can afford the experience. The gate at the entrance is not a secret. It is a selling point. Hit the like button. It tells the algorithm this story matters. The locked road pattern is the piece that generates the most comments, the most local frustration, and the least official coverage. When large-scale buyers consolidate multiple parcels of Ozarks land, they frequently acquire tracts that contain or adjoin roads that locals have used for decades. for hunting access, for reaching back sections of their own property, for reaching rivers and streams that have been part of the community's practical landscape for generations, roads that were never formally closed because nobody who owned the land previously had any reason to close them. The access was informal, assumed, built into the way people related to the land around them. The new owners frequently do have a reason to close them: privacy, liability, the creation of an exclusive recreational experience that depends on restricting who can enter. The legal disputes that follow are documented in county property records and Ozarks forums across Missouri. New buyers gating roads that were openly accessible, landowners unable to reach portions of their own property, years of back and forth about whether a historical usage creates a legal right of access. Missouri's legal framework strongly favors the landowner's right to exclude. Proving a prescriptive easement, a legal right of access based on historical use, requires documentation, legal standing, and years of court process that most affected families cannot sustain. The practical outcome in most cases is that the gate stays where the new owner put it. The road that was open for 50 years stays closed. The river that locals floated for decades becomes accessible only to people who own the land on both banks or can afford a guided experience on a private preserve. This is not illegal. It is not secret. It is the straightforward exercise of property rights in a state where 93% of the land is privately owned, and those owners have broad legal authority over who can enter and who cannot. The question is not whether it is legal. The question is what it means for the Ozarks as a living community rather than an asset class, and whether anyone in Jefferson City is paying attention to the answer. The Ozarks is not a wilderness that belongs to no one. It never was. It is 93% privately owned land, and it has always been primarily private. What made it feel open to the people who lived inside it was not a legal right to access. It was a social arrangement, the accumulated understanding between neighbors and communities that the hills and woods and roads were shared in ways the title documents did not require and the law did not protect. The informal access that generations of Ozarks families took for granted was always a courtesy, not a guarantee. That social arrangement is what large-scale outside ownership dissolves, not necessarily through deliberate hostility, not necessarily through any intention beyond the basic and legally supported exercise of a landowner's right to control their property. The investment fund that acquired the ridge above the valley has no prior relationship with the community below it, and no reason to honor informal conventions it was never party to. The private preserve that fenced the hillside did not agree to maintain the community's access to the creek at the bottom of it. The Chinese-linked walnut company in the Ozarks counties has no connection to the history of how that land was used, who walked it, or what it meant to the people who lived around it. Nobody in any of these cases is required to say who they are beyond what the minimum legal disclosure requires. Nobody is required to explain what they plan to do with the land. Nobody is required to leave the gate open, and the official systems that are supposed to tell the public who owns what and how much are riddled with gaps that are documented, acknowledged, and unfixed. Parts of the Ozarks are being locked off. The honest answer to who owns them is the public record does not fully know, and the people responsible for maintaining that record have not been given the tools or the mandate to find out. The complete picture, who is actually behind the land that is closing around the communities that have always lived inside it, does not exist in any form that an ordinary Missouri resident can access. That is not an accident. That is how the system was designed. The question is whether the people who live in the Ozarks are willing to keep living with it. Subscribe if you haven't. Hit the bell. Drop a comment. Have you seen a gate go up somewhere it didn't used to be? Because every one of those comments is evidence the official records will never capture. Thank you for watching. The truth doesn't shout. It waits for you to look closer.